Hello everyone, I'm Hema, and in this video I want to give a quick walkthrough of how you can interact with Trino and Superset deployed on Operate First. I also have this document that you see on my screen which lists out all the step-by-step instructions you can follow while you try to create your dashboards on Superset, along with interacting with Trino for creating all of your tables based on the data sets that you have in your Ceph and S3 buckets. So earlier, some of you may be aware that we were using Thrift Server and Hue in place of Trino that we have now. Thrift Server and Trino are similar in the sense that they are both distributed SQL query engines which are designed to query large data sets distributed over different data sources. Trino is slightly more powerful in the sense that it can execute larger and complex queries, and hence is now our chosen SQL query engine, which is supported by the Open Data Hub as well. In order to interact with Trino, we have something called as Cloud Beaver. Cloud Beaver is a web application or a desktop application for database management, which provides users with a UI for interacting with these SQL databases. And we have a Cloud Beaver, which is the community edition deployed on Operate First, that we will be using for interacting and creating all of our tables within the SQL database. So before we get started, we should be aware that in order to actually start creating our tables, since most of our data is located in Ceph in our S3 buckets, we have already configured Trino to use the op data catalog S3 bucket. So this is currently the default bucket that we have configured, and it's ready for us to start creating tables for all the data files which are residing inside of this bucket. Since most of our Blackflake project is using this bucket, we have configured it for this so that we can start suiting all of our data visualization needs. And once we have this bucket configured with Trino, we can start using Cloud Beaver to actually create the tables for importing these data sets. So to log into Cloud Beaver, we have this URL which is for Operate First environment, and once you go to Cloud Beaver, you can log in. Currently we have the admin account set up, but we can also look into creating different accounts for various users. Once you log into Cloud Beaver, as I mentioned earlier, we already have configured the Operate First Trino database already for you. So you should see the Operate First Trino database popping up over here. And when you click on the drop down, you should see the structure within this database. So inside the Trino database, the structure looks like this. We have something called as catalogs, which is the highest layer. So here you can see we have the Hive catalog, we have the system catalog, and inside these catalogs you have different schemas created. As you can see here, we have a default schema, we have an OCP schema that I've created, we have a test schema that I've created, and so on. And inside of each of these schemas is where we create all of our tables, our views, and so on. So now that we know how this structure looks like, let's go ahead and start creating a new schema for the purpose of the demo. And to do this, we will need to execute certain SQL commands. So in the main tab over here, there's an option to select SQL, which will create a new SQL script for you to enter all of your SQL statements. Now, before you actually start executing your statements, you need to ensure that you've selected the right database. So you should see that showing up over here. In the drop down, you'll see the different databases to choose from. We're going to use the Operate First Trino database, and then you can select the catalog. So we're always going to be using the Hive catalog. This is the main catalog that we'll be working with, and this is where you'll be creating all of your schemas and tables. So always make sure to do everything within the Hive catalog. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and create a new schema. So I'm going to run a create schema and specify under which catalog. So this is going to be under the Hive catalog, and give it a schema name, and click on run to execute the query. Always remember that you need to specify the catalog name each time you execute any query. So that's why it's important to note that it's always going to be within the Hive catalog. Once you have the schema created, you should be able to see it pop up over here, and you can see that by clicking on this hamburger icon, you can actually do a refresh. So when I click on this refresh, it should show the new schema popping up for us. And now that we have this new example schema, we can go ahead and create the table for it. To do this, I'm actually going to take the help of some of the old tables that I've created. So I'm going to say show create table hive.ocp.time to test. So this is an older table that I've already created, but I want to know what was the SQL statement I used to create this table, just so that we can reuse the same SQL statement. So as you can see, it shows what was the SQL statement for it. If I click on this and say show in value panel, it will show me the SQL equivalent statement. So I'm just gonna copy this over and run that query here. So for creating a table, again, you need to mention the catalog name followed by the schema name followed by the table. So here I'm going to mention the schema as our example schema. I'm going to keep the table name as time to test, and then we specify all the various columns associated in this table and the data type of each of the columns that you have. Once we've identified the columns, you can actually go ahead and specify which S3 path you need for fetching the data from. So for example, for this time to test, I'm actually looking at the op data catalog bucket. Inside this bucket, we have a folder called metrics created for the Blackflake project, where we are storing different Parquet files for the different KPI metrics that we've defined for the project. And I want to look at the time to test KPI metric. So inside the metrics folder, I'm going to look at all the Parquet files inside the time to test folder. And since we know that all of these files are Parquet, you can mention the format to be Parquet, and then we can go ahead and execute this SQL statement, and it will create the table for us. While it's creating the table, let me go ahead and take you to Trino itself. So Trino is actually deployed on Operate First over here, and you can just log in with Trino as the user ID. And once you log into Trino, you should actually see this landing page. So here we get information such as how many queries are currently running, what are the active workers, how many queries are blocked, and other such important metrics from an operations standpoint. Or if you're looking to debug, you can always use Trino UI for this purpose. And you can also look at the query details over here. So these are some of the queries that were executed in the past, and you can see at what timestamp they were submitted and whether they completed successfully or did they have any failures in them. You can filter them out accordingly. So for example, here you saw that I executed a query just a minute ago, which was creating the table. You can see that it finished successfully, and so on. You can look at all the other queries that were executed in the past, and each query also has a query ID. So if you click on that query ID, you can actually go and look into the more details and logs associated with this query. For example, what was the resource utilization for this query, and other such information that you might be interested in while looking at this query. So this is where you can actually use Trino to get more information on the queries themselves in terms of their performance, or if there were any issues while executing those queries. So let's go back and see if our table was created, we see that the status was successful. Now let's actually see if there is some data which is created inside this table and if it's importing all the right files. So I'm just gonna quickly run a select statement. So we're gonna look at the time to test table, and I'm just gonna look at the first 10 rows just to see if we have any data being created inside the table. And once we're good to go and we know that the table is actually populated with the values from our Parquet files, we can go ahead and move on to phase 2, which is creating all of our dashboards in Superset. So as you can see, it did return values. We can see that all the column names are there. We have various values populated for it. So we should be good to go to start using this table within Superset. So that moves on to the second half of the process of the workflow, where we will start configuring all of the data sets and log into Superset to create the visualizations. So this is the Operate First Superset instance. We can go in here and log in. Again, currently we're just using an admin account, but we can request the Operate First team to create different accounts for various users. And once you have your account and you're able to log in, you should see this landing page. And like I mentioned earlier, Superset is already configured with the Operate First Trino database. So if you go to data and you look at databases, we see that we already have Operate First Trino database. So we're good to go to start using this database, and you don't have to worry about configuring this all over again. What we need to worry about now is start importing the tables that we've created in our Trino, basically have them exposed in Superset so that we can create the visualizations. So to do this, we'll go to data, we'll go to data sets, and here you should see the option to add a new data set. So when you click on this, it'll ask you to select the database. So we have the Operate First Trino selected here, the schema that you want to use. By default, we have specified Superset to use the Hive catalog. So you should see all the schemas which are present within the Hive catalog over here. So there are about 5 schemas, it says, and you can see all the various schemas. Let's go ahead and select the example schema we created, and then we can also go ahead and select the table within this schema. So here we have the time to test table that we've created, and we can go ahead and click on add. Once this data set is added, we can go ahead and create our visualizations. As you can see, it says that that data set already exists, so which is true. I think I've already created this a while ago, so that's why it said that it's pre-existing, so that's fine. So we already have this time to test. I can probably delete this just to restart it all over again. So we have it deleted now, so I'll go ahead and add the data set again, choose the schema as example, and select my table to be time to test. Once that's done, we're ready to start adding our charts. So I'm going to click on time to test and say add, and now it shouldn't give me an error because there's no data set. So perfect, it's created that data set. It says it's under the schema example, and we have the name of the table as well. So now that we have this data set, you can go ahead and start creating your charts. So when you click on charts over here, you have the option to create a new chart. You can select the data set. So right now I want to look at the example dot time to test that I've created, and then I can choose a visualization type. So there are a bunch of commonly used graphs you can select from. I'm going to go ahead and create a bar chart and say create new chart. Once you've done this, it'll take you to the page where you actually execute your queries and you specify the queries that you want for rendering your graph. So keep in mind that different visualizations you select will have different settings you'll have to configure to render your graph accordingly. So for the bar chart, under the query, you can go ahead and start executing your SQL query. So under metrics is where you can actually write your SQL statement. Either you can add in your own custom SQL or you can choose from a simple SQL statement. For example, here I want to do an average of all the test duration. I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And now I want to group this by different test grid dashboards. So the data set we have here is a test grid dataset metric files that we've been using in the Black Flake project. So I want to group them by different test grid dashboards, and we have this field here called series, and it says it's one or many columns to group by. So I'm going to go ahead and group it by this column called tab, and once it's done you can go ahead and execute the query. Once the query is completed, you should see the graph rendered like so. You can see that it's showing me all the average test duration grouped by different test grid dashboards. It's sorted in descending order, so I can see that this one took the highest test duration time of 122.91 minutes, and then we have the lowest here of about 5.83 minutes. I can go ahead and give it a chart name, so I'm going to say average test duration grouped by test grid dashboards or test grid tabs. Once you're happy with this, you can go ahead and click on save, and you can either add this chart to an existing dashboard or add it to a completely new dashboard. I'm going to add it to an existing dashboard that I've created earlier. I'm going to say save and go to dashboard. Once we have that, you should see the new chart populating over here, and these are some charts that I've created in the past inside this dashboard. So you can see here I have a bunch of charts based on different queries and data sets that I've used. So once we've added it to the dashboard, how do we now share this dashboard? So you can see here that this dashboard is published. If it is not, it will actually be showing it as draft, and it will not show up in the list of dashboards of Superset. So please make sure that you enable this to be published. And to share the dashboard, you can actually click on these three dots. Once you've saved it, you can copy the dashboard URL and share that link with other members of the team. You can also share it via email, and you can also edit the dashboard, such as, let's say you want to add a markdown somewhere, you want to add a new row, and so on. You can do that, and you can also filter out all the charts that you have on your dashboard and save them to your dashboard and then publish it to be shared with others. So that's basically the entire workflow of how we can start creating our visualizations from our S3 files stored, and hopefully that gives a better understanding and easier for you all to try it out for yourselves. Please let us know if you run into any issues, or leave comments on the document if there are any steps which are unclear or missing. That would be great to help us polish this entire onboarding guide. One last thing that I wanted to mention is there is one issue that I'm currently looking into, which is mainly the timestamp data type in Parquet files not being able to be read inside Trino. So we have this data set here where I had a timestamp column in my Parquet file, and I created the table with the data type as timestamp. So if you want to see what are the data types supported inside the schema, if you look at the data types folder here, you should be able to see the list of the different data types that's supported. So there is a timestamp data type supported, and I had created the column with the timestamp data type, as you can see. However, all the values seem to currently return null. I'm not sure if this is something to do with the mapping of timestamps in Trino and the datetime object that we had in Python, and that's why we have this issue. But currently looking into this, and if anybody has any ideas or how we can figure this out, that would be great. But apart from that, the rest of the workflow works completely fine. So I hope this video was helpful, and thank you for watching.